She fed the toddler everyone ignored, never knowing his father was the Mafia boss watching her. The waitress thought she was just being kind to a forgotten child. She had no idea the man outside in the snowstorm, the one who'd been watching her every move for weeks, could end her life with a single phone call. Or that he was about to walk through that door and change everything she thought she knew about survival, mercy, and what happens when you accidentally save the son of the most dangerous man in Boston. Before you continue listening, please take a moment to click the subscribe button. It costs a dime. It's help us keep motivated and be creative to give you the best story, always just like this. Now back to the story. Naomi Clark had learned to notice the invisible people. It was a skill born from necessity, cultivated during the 3 years she'd spent essentially invisible herself, sleeping in her car outside a Detroit Walmart, showering at the YMCA, pretending to browse grocery stores for warmth while her stomach tried to digest itself. You learned things during those months, like how security guards could look right through you if you walked with purpose, how other people's discarded coffee still had a few sips left if you weren't too proud, how a person could sit in a public space for hours and not a single soul would acknowledge their existence. So when the little boy walked into Russo's Café that February afternoon, small, pale, swimming in a coat that could have fit 2 of him, and sat down at the corner table without ordering, without calling out, without doing anything except existing in that particular shade of desperate quiet she recognized from her own reflection 3 years ago, Naomi noticed. Everyone else? They performed Olympic-level mental gymnastics to avoid eye contact. The businessman with the laptop suddenly became fascinated by his spreadsheet. The college students debating philosophy very loudly, very performatively, somehow didn't see a whole human child sitting 6 feet away. Even Rita, who'd been working at Russo's longer than Naomi had been alive and whose kindness was usually legendary, just walked past him. Twice. It was like watching a collective agreement to pretend a problem didn't exist if you all simultaneously refused to acknowledge it. Hey friend, if this story pulled you in, go ahead and subscribe and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Tomorrow, another powerful story is coming your way, just as interesting as this, maybe even more. You won't want to miss it. Naomi had seen this movie before. She'd starred in this movie before. Hey there, sweetheart. She knelt beside his table, bringing herself to eye level. The boy didn't look at her immediately. His gaze was fixed on something outside the window, something in the swirling snow that held his attention like a lifeline. His hands were wrapped around an empty ceramic cup, probably left from a previous customer, and his fingers were red with cold. You waiting for someone? Nothing. Not even a blink. I'm Naomi. I work here. She kept her voice soft, the same tone she used when coaxing the neighborhood's stray cat out from under the dumpster. Are you hungry? We've got fresh croissants that came out about 10 minutes ago, and between you and me, they're basically edible clouds. Still nothing, but something flickered in his expression. So brief, she almost missed it. A microflinch of what? Recognition? Interest? Hope? She tried again. How about hot chocolate? I make it with real milk and way too much whipped cream because my manager isn't here to judge my portions. This time his eyes shifted. Just barely, just enough to glance at her before returning to the window, but it was something. The boy was in there somewhere, behind whatever walls he'd built or whatever trauma had built them for him. Naomi knew those walls intimately. Okay, sweetheart. I'll be right back. She stood, her knees protesting. 26 was too young to have knees that creaked, but apparently 3 years of sleeping in a Camry had disagreed, and headed to the counter. The cafe was unusually quiet for a Friday afternoon, the snowstorm having scared off most of the usual crowd. Just the hardcore regulars and the desperately caffeinated remained, their conversations creating a low hum that felt almost companionable. Through the front window, partially obscured by the fog of warm air meeting frozen glass, she could see the snow coming down in sheets. Boston weather had a personal vendetta against happiness, she decided. It was either too hot, too cold, too humid, or too aggressively trying to kill you with precipitation. Today it had chosen the latter. She made the hot chocolate the way she would have wanted it during those Walmart parking lot nights. Extra chocolate, extra whipped cream, topped with a sprinkle of cinnamon because, Why not make something beautiful even if the world insisted on being ugly? She grabbed 3 croissants, one plain, one chocolate, one almond, because she didn't know his preference, and variety seemed important when dealing with tiny humans who wouldn't speak. When she returned to his table, he still hadn't moved. Same position, same thousand-yard stare at the window, same heartbreaking stillness. All right, mystery man. Let's see what we've got here. She set the plate down with theatrical flair, arranging the pastries like she was plating at a Michelin star restaurant instead of a cafe that specialized in aggressively mediocre paninis. 3 croissants, each with their own unique personality. This one's plain, classic, reliable, the friend who shows up to help you move. This one's chocolate, fancy, a little messy, probably has opinions about French cinema. And this one's almond, sophisticated, slightly nutty, literally and figuratively. Was she talking too much?
Probably.
But silence felt dangerous right now. Like if she stopped filling the space with words, the boy might disappear entirely into whatever internal void he was staring into. She placed the hot chocolate in front of him, the ceramic mug warm enough to hopefully thaw his frozen fingers. There you go. Fair warning, it's hot enough to require adult supervision, but you strike me as someone who can handle their cocoa responsibly. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, so slowly she thought she might be imagining it, his hands released the empty cup and reached for the warm one. His fingers wrapped around it, and she watched his entire body respond to the heat. His shoulders dropped a fraction of an inch. His breathing, which she hadn't realized was so shallow, deepened slightly. Victory tasted like watching a tiny human remember warmth existed. That's it, sweetheart. Take your time. She started to stand, to give him space, but something made her pause. Maybe it was the way he was still staring out that window like he was watching for something. Or maybe it was her own memory of sitting alone in public spaces, terrified and trying to be invisible while simultaneously desperate for anyone, to see you. So, instead of leaving, she sat down across from him. You know what I think. She folded her hands on the table, casual, like they were old friends catching up. I think everybody in here is so busy with their own stuff, their deadlines and their drama, and their very important opinions about things that won't matter next week, that they forgot how to see what's right in front of them. But not you. You see things. I can tell. The boy's eyes flickered toward her again, this time holding for a full second before returning to the window. Progress. I used to do that too, she continued, her voice softer now. Stare out windows, I mean. Waiting for things to make sense, or for someone to show up, or for the universe to remember I existed. It's lonely, huh? Being in a room full of people who act like you're not even there. His hands tightened around the mug. Naomi's chest constricted. Yeah, he understood exactly what she meant. But here's what I figured out. She leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice like she was sharing classified information. The people who don't see you? That's their problem, not yours. Their loss, not yours. Because you, mystery man, are clearly someone worth seeing. She reached for the chocolate croissant and gently pushed it closer to him. Try this one. It's my favorite. Life's too short for plain pastries. For the first time since she'd approached, the boy looked directly at her. Really looked. His eyes were this striking gray-blue, the color of ice over deep water, and they held an awareness that seemed far too old for his small face. Whatever this kid had been through, it had aged him in ways that had nothing to do with years. Then, miracle of miracles, he reached for the croissant. His movements were careful, uncertain, like he was expecting the food to be snatched away or like he'd forgotten how to perform the basic mechanics of eating. But he picked it up, brought it to his mouth, and took a small bite. Naomi felt tears prick her eyes and immediately blinked them back. This wasn't about her. This was about a little boy who was eating, who was accepting help, who was maybe, just maybe, starting to believe that someone cared whether he was warm and fed. Good choice, she said, her voice thick with emotions she couldn't quite name. The chocolate never disappoints. He took another bite, then another. Small bites, but consistent. And with each one, something in his expression shifted. The rigid tension in his small shoulders eased. His breathing evened out. He was still pale, Still too thin, still wrapped in grief or trauma or whatever nightmare had brought him to this cafe alone in a snowstorm. But he was eating. And for right now, in this moment, that felt like saving the world. Naomi didn't notice the man outside the window. Didn't see the massive figure in the black coat standing in the snow, half hidden by the storm, watching every move she made with an intensity that would have terrified her if she'd known it existed. Didn't know that for the past 2 weeks, he'd been standing in that exact spot every afternoon when his son, because yes, this was his son, his Alexei, his entire reason for existing wrapped up in a too small body with too much pain, came to this cafe that he'd led him to in a moment of desperate cowardice. She didn't know Viktor Morozov had been watching her transform a silent, unreachable son into a child who smiled, who ate, who looked at another human being with something other than hollow grief. She didn't know he'd memorized her schedule, her route to work, the way she always brought an extra sandwich for Harold, the homeless veteran who sat outside the pharmacy. Didn't know Victor had run a background check so thorough he knew about the Walmart parking lot, the eviction from the Detroit apartment, the student loans she was drowning in, the mother who died when she was 19, leaving her with nothing but medical debt and a broken heart. She didn't know that the most dangerous man in Boston was falling in love with her kindness while simultaneously terrified of what his world would do to someone that good. All Naomi knew was that the little boy across from her had just reached for his hot chocolate with both hands and taken a sip, and his eyes had widened with something that looked almost like joy, and that felt more important than anything else happening in the universe. Good, right?
She grinned.
Told you I don't mess around with the whipped cream ratio. And for the first time since he'd walked into the cafe, for the first time in 5 months according to his father, who was trying not to completely lose his mind outside in the cold, the boy's lips curved upward. Not quite a smile, but close enough to shatter something in Victor's chest and rebuild it simultaneously. Close enough to make Naomi Clark believe that maybe, just maybe, she'd done something right in this aggressively disappointing world. Close enough to change absolutely everything. Viktor Morozov had killed 12 men in his lifetime. He remembered each one with crystalline clarity, their names, their crimes, the exact moment the light left their eyes. Some had deserved it more than others. A few had probably deserved worse. But he remembered them all because that's what separated him from the animals he'd spent 2 decades keeping in line. He chose to remember. Chose to carry the weight. Chose to acknowledge that every decision had consequences that didn't disappear just because you were powerful enough to avoid legal ones. But standing outside Russo's cafe in a snowstorm that was actively trying to give him hypothermia, watching a stranger coax his son back to life through a fogged window, Victor discovered a new kind of violence, the kind you inflicted on yourself by being too much of a coward to walk through a door. 3 weeks. He'd been doing this for 3 weeks. Every afternoon at 2:47 p.m., he'd drive Alexei to this neighborhood, one of the few areas in Boston he owned but didn't actually operate in because even crime lords needed Switzerland, apparently. He'd park down the street, watch his son walk into the cafe with instructions to wait for Papa, and then Victor would stand outside like some kind of deranged stalker watching his own child receive the affection and care he couldn't provide. It was pathetic. It was necessary. It was destroying him slowly, one successful interaction at a time. Today was worse than usual. Today, Alexei had smiled. Not much. Barely a curve of lips that could have been mistaken for a facial tic if you weren't desperately cataloging every micro-expression for signs of life. But Victor knew his son's face better than he knew his own, had spent 5 months studying it for any crack in the trauma, any hint that the boy he'd held as a screaming, perfect newborn was still in there somewhere. That smile, that tiny, fragile, heartbreaking smile, had appeared because of her. Naomi Clark, 26 years old. Former waitress at a Detroit IHOP before the eviction. Moved to Boston 8 months ago with $247 and a dream that probably involved not freezing to death. Currently employed at Russo's, making $12 an hour plus tips that barely covered her studio apartment in Dorchester. No criminal record. No outstanding warrants. No connections to any organization Victor's people had flagged. Just a woman who'd survived her own nightmare and somehow emerged with enough compassion left over to notice a traumatized child everyone else ignored. Victor had never hated himself more than he did watching her succeed where he failed. The rational part of his brain, the part that had built an empire through strategic thinking and controlled brutality, knew this was good. Knew Alexei needed this connection, this reminder that humans could be kind, that the world hadn't completely transformed into the burning hellscape that had stolen his mother. The therapists, all four of them, because apparently childhood trauma required a committee, had said socialization with safe adults was crucial. But the irrational part, the part that was still just a father watching his son come alive for someone else, wanted to put his fist through the window. Not from anger. From grief, so profound it felt like drowning on dry land. Boss. Victor didn't turn. Dmitri had the self-preservation instincts of a caffeinated squirrel, but he was loyal and he knew when to keep his observations to a minimum. The fact that he'd even spoken meant something needed Victor's attention.
What?
It wasn't a question. Victor didn't do questions when he was standing in a snowstorm having an emotional crisis. Volkov's people are moving shipments through the harbor. Third time this month. Dmitri materialized beside him, a mountain of a man in a coat that somehow made him look like a disappointed geometry teacher rather than an enforcer who'd once broken someone's spine with his bare hands. They're getting bold. Let them. Victor's eyes never left the window, where Naomi was now laughing at something, probably her own joke because Alexei still wouldn't speak, maybe would never speak again because Victor had failed to protect the only person who'd ever made his son feel safe. Boss. I said let them, Dmitri. Victor's voice dropped to the register that made seasoned criminals reconsider their life choices. Unless they're actively trying to kill me, I don't care what Sergei Volkov's doing with his compensatory shipping routes. Dmitri was quiet for a moment. Then, because he apparently had a death wish today, you can't keep doing this. Doing what?
This.
Dmitri gestured at the café, at Victor, at the entire pathetic tableau of a man who could orchestrate international criminal operations but couldn't figure out how to make his own son eat breakfast. Standing outside like some kind of... He trailed off, wisely realizing there was no good way to finish that sentence. Like some kind of what? Victor's tone was conversational, which was somehow more threatening than if he'd been yelling. Failed father? Emotional disaster? Man whose wife died because he made enemies faster than he made amends. Boss. She got him to eat, Dmitri. Victor's voice cracked, just slightly, just enough to make Dmitri look away out of respect for a vulnerability neither of them would ever acknowledge again. 3 weeks ago, he walked in there and sat at that table and she brought him food without him asking. Just saw him. Saw that he needed something and gave it to him. And he ate. Inside the cafe, Naomi was explaining something with animated hand gestures. Alexei was watching her with an attention span Victor hadn't seen since before Katya died. The boy even reached for another croissant, reached for it himself, without prompting, like eating was something he remembered how to do voluntarily. I've hired specialists, Victor continued, his voice hollow. People with degrees from universities I can't pronounce. Therapists who charge more per hour than most people make in a week. And you know what they told me? Give him time. Give him space. Give him patience. Like I have any of those things to give. You're trying. Trying isn't enough. The words came out sharper than Victor intended, sharp enough that a passing pedestrian quickly decided the other side of the street was more interesting. He took a breath, forced his voice back down to something resembling controlled. I can dismantle a rival operation in 3 moves. I can read a room and know who's planning to betray me before they've finished the thought. I can negotiate peace treaties between families that have been killing each other for generations. But I cannot get my own son to look at me without flinching. Dmitri shifted his weight, snow accumulating on his massive shoulders. So, what's the plan? Stand out here until you freeze, or until she notices the terrifying man stalking her workplace. I don't have a plan. Victor finally looked away from the window, meeting Dmitri's concerned gaze. For the first time in 20 years, I don't have a goddamn plan. Then make one.
What would you suggest? Walk in there?
Introduce myself? Hello, I'm Viktor Morozov. You might know me from such hits as the Rostov Massacre and That Thing with the Harbor last summer. Thanks for feeding my traumatized son, by the way. Hope you don't mind that my enemies occasionally try to kill me and everyone I care about. Dmitri actually smiled, which was unsettling on his usually stoic face. Could work. Women love honesty. Women love not being murdered because they accidentally got involved with a mafia boss. You don't know that she'd be. Yes, I do. Viktor turned back to the window, where Naomi was now drawing something on a napkin, probably a picture or a game, something to keep Alexei engaged. His son was leaning forward, interested, present in a way he never was at home. I know exactly what my world does to good people. I watched it happen to Katya. I'm watching it happen to Alexei. I'm not doing that to her. So, you're just going to what? Keep watching from outside? For how long? Forever, Viktor thought. Until Alexei doesn't need this anymore. Until I figure out how to be what he needs. Until the universe offers me a better solution than standing in a snowstorm, watching a stranger parent my child better than I can. As long as it takes. Boss, that's... Dmitri. Viktor's voice went cold, final. Drop it. Dmitri, demonstrating the survival instincts that had kept him alive in this business for 15 years, dropped it. They stood in silence, two dangerous men in expensive coats being slowly buried by Boston's aggressive weather patterns. Watching a scene of such simple human kindness, it felt like observing another species. Naomi had gotten up from the table now, but not before ruffling Alexei's hair in a gesture so natural, so unconsciously affectionate, that Viktor's chest physically hurt. His son didn't flinch, didn't pull away, just accepted the touch like it was normal, like human contact wasn't something to be feared. When was the last time Alexei had let Viktor touch him without tensing up? He couldn't remember. Naomi disappeared toward the back of the cafe, probably returning to her actual job responsibilities rather than entertaining stray children. But she'd left the plate of croissants, the hot chocolate, and Viktor noticed with something uncomfortably close to jealousy, a napkin with what looked like a roughly drawn cat wearing a crown. Alexei picked up the napkin carefully, studying it like it was a sacred text. Then, in a gesture that nearly brought Viktor to his knees, the boy smiled again and carefully folded the napkin, tucking it into his coat pocket like treasure. He's keeping it, Dmitri observed unnecessarily. I can see that. That's good, right? That he's connecting with her? Viktor didn't answer. Couldn't answer. Because yes, it was good that Alexei was connecting with someone, that he was showing signs of healing, that the therapy speak about safe attachments was apparently manifesting in real time. But it also meant Viktor was losing his son to a stranger's kindness because he'd been too broken by grief and guilt to offer his own. Inside the cafe, Naomi returned with what looked like a children's book. She sat back down across from Alexei and opened it, pointing at pictures, her lips moving in explanation, even though the boy wasn't speaking back. But he was engaged, nodding, pointing at things himself, participating in the world in a way he never did at home. I need to know everything about her, Viktor said quietly. Boss, we already ran. Everything, Dmitri. Where she grew up, what happened to her parents, why she moved to Boston, who she talks to, who she avoids, what she's afraid of, what she wants. Viktor's jaw tightened. I need to know if she's safe. Safe from what? From me. Dmitri was quiet for a long moment. Then, and if she's not? If getting involved with her, with this situation, puts her in danger? Then I walk away. The words felt like swallowing glass. I take Alexei home. I hire more therapists. I figure out another way. Boss. I won't be responsible for another death, Dmitri. I won't watch another good person get destroyed because they had the misfortune of being seen by me. They fell silent again, the snow accumulating around them like the universe was trying to bury all evidence of this conversation. Viktor's practical side, the side that had survived 2 decades in a business where sentimentality was fatal, was screaming that this was already too complicated. That he should collect Alexei, cut off this connection before it became necessary, find a different solution that didn't involve civilians who could become collateral damage. But the father in him, The part that had died with Katia and been buried deeper every day his son refused to speak, was begging for just a few more minutes. Just a few more afternoons of watching Alexei remember how to be a child. Just a few more glimpses of what healing might look like if Victor hadn't already broken everything beyond repair. 5 more minutes, Victor said, though whether he was talking to Dmitri or himself wasn't clear. Inside, Naomi laughed at something in the book, the sound muffled by glass and distance, but still somehow audible over the wind. Alexei's face did that thing, that tiny upturn of lips that wasn't quite a smile but was closer than Victor had seen in months. 5 more minutes turned into 10, then 15, then 20. By the time Victor finally made himself walk back to the car, made himself accept that watching was all he could offer right now, his coat was white with snow and his heart was heavy with a longing so intense it felt like a physical wound. He didn't see Naomi glance out the window as he left, didn't see her frown slightly at the massive figure disappearing into the storm, didn't see her make a mental note that the same man had been standing outside at the same time for the past 3 weeks. Didn't know she was starting to wonder who he was and why he looked so heartbroken. Didn't know that tomorrow, everything would change. Because tomorrow, Viktor Morozov was going to do something he hadn't done in 5 months. He was going to walk through that door, sit across from his son, and introduce himself to the woman who'd accidentally stolen both their hearts. And God helped them all when his world and hers finally collided. What would you do if you discovered the person you'd been helping had a dangerous secret? Would you walk away or risk getting involved? Drop your thoughts in the comments. The problem with making life-altering decisions at 2 a.m. while drinking vodka that cost more than most people's rent was that they still felt like good ideas at 2 p.m. the next day, when you were stone-cold sober and standing outside a cafe having a panic attack. Viktor Morozov, who negotiated with terrorists, stared down cartel bosses, and once convinced a Chechen warlord to take a payment plan, was terrified of a door. Not the door itself, obviously. The door was innocuous. Forest green paint, brass handle that needed polishing, a cheerful little open sign that hung crooked like even the cafe's signage couldn't commit to professionalism. It was a door that promised decent coffee and mediocre paninis and the kind of small-town warmth that Boston pretended didn't exist beneath its aggressive northeastern exterior. No, Victor was terrified of what walking through that door meant. It meant admitting he needed help. It meant exposing Alexei, and by extension himself, to another person who could become a target. It meant trusting a stranger with the most vulnerable parts of his completely demolished life. It meant risking the tentative progress his son had made if this went badly. It meant approximately 700 things could go catastrophically wrong, and Victor had built his entire empire on controlling variables and eliminating threats before they materialized. You couldn't eliminate kindness. Couldn't negotiate with compassion. Couldn't threaten goodness into submission. Which left him standing outside Russo's Café at 2:47 p.m. on a Friday, holding his son's hand, trying to remember how normal human socialization worked. "Papa?" Alexei's voice was so quiet Victor almost missed it, even though hearing his son speak at all still felt like witnessing a miracle. The boy had started talking again 2 days ago, single words, mostly, directed at no one in particular. But he was talking, and Victor would take whatever fractional progress the universe was willing to offer. "Yes, Sin?" Victor crouched down, bringing himself to eye level. Alexei's face was still too pale, too thin, but there was something different now. A spark of, not quite hope, but maybe curiosity. Maybe the first fragile shoots of healing poking through trauma's scorched earth. Inside. Alexei pointed at the door with his free hand, his gray-blue eyes questioning. "Yes. We're going inside today." Victor smoothed down his son's coat, still too big, still Katia's final purchase, still a reminder of everything they'd lost. Together. Alexei nodded solemnly, like Victor had just proposed something requiring great courage. Which, frankly, felt accurate. Victor stood, took a breath that did absolutely nothing to calm his nervous system, and opened the door. The cafe was warmer than outside, thank God, and smelled like coffee and cinnamon and something baking that immediately made his mouth water despite the anxiety currently trying to strangle him. The interior was exactly what he'd expected from weeks of external observation. Mismatched furniture that somehow worked, walls covered in local art that ranged from legitimately talented to someone's nephew needed encouragement, and a general atmosphere of determined coziness that felt aggressively wholesome. It was the polar opposite of every space Victor usually inhabited, and he had no idea how to exist in it. Several customers looked up when they entered, a natural response to a 6'4" man built like a tank walking in with a small child, but their attention slid away quickly when he didn't immediately do anything threatening. Just another father and son grabbing a snack. Nothing to see here. Definitely not a criminal overlord having an emotional breakdown disguised as an afternoon cafe visit. Then Victor saw her, and his entire respiratory system forgot how to function. Naomi was behind the counter, laughing at something an elderly customer was saying, her whole face lit up with genuine amusement. She was even more striking up close. Her dark skin seemed to glow under the cafe's warm lighting, her hair pulled back in a style that was probably practical for work, but looked effortlessly elegant. She wore the same white uniform shirt he'd seen through the window, but somehow on her it looked like a choice rather than a requirement. She was beautiful in the way that scared him, not because of features or aesthetics, but because she radiated the kind of unguarded warmth that felt dangerous in his world. People like her didn't survive proximity to people like him. As if sensing his stare, she looked up. Their eyes met across the cafe, and Victor watched her expression shift through several stages. Polite customer service smile, genuine recognition of Alexei, confusion about the massive man attached to the child's hand, and then something else. Something that looked almost like concern. She'd noticed him outside. Of course she had. He'd been standing in a snowstorm for 3 weeks like some kind of deranged stalker. Subtle, Victor. Very subtle. But instead of looking alarmed or calling the police or any of the reasonable responses to discovering you'd been watched, Naomi just smiled. A real smile. Warm and open, and walked over. "Well, hello there, mystery man." She addressed Alexei first, crouching down to his level with an ease that suggested she actually liked children rather than just tolerated them. "I was hoping I'd see you today. I saved you a chocolate croissant because I had a feeling you'd appreciate it." Alexei's face did that thing, the almost smile that Victor had memorized because it appeared so rarely, and he pressed closer to Victor's leg, not hiding exactly but seeking reassurance. "And you must be." Naomi straightened, her gaze shifting to Victor with open curiosity. Up close, her eyes were a deep brown that seemed to see more than Victor was comfortable with anyone seeing.
"Dad."
Victor. His voice came out rougher than intended, scraped raw by emotions he couldn't name and didn't want to examine. Yes, his father." Smooth Morozov. Very articulate. Truly the negotiation skills of a criminal mastermind on full display. "Naomi." She extended her hand, the gesture so natural and friendly that Victor hesitated before taking it. Her grip was firm, her palm warm, and the handshake lasted exactly the appropriate amount of time for a normal human interaction. Victor had forgotten what those felt like. "I've been wondering when I'd get to meet you officially." There was no accusation in her tone, no judgment about the weeks he'd spent watching from outside. Just a simple statement of fact delivered with a smile that suggested she understood more than she was saying. "I should have introduced myself sooner." Victor released her hand before the contact could become weird. I wanted to make sure." He trailed off, unsure how to finish that sentence without revealing too much. "I wanted to make sure you weren't dangerous. I wanted to make sure my son would accept your kindness before I risked contaminating it with my presence. I wanted to make sure you were real and not some grief-induced hallucination. You wanted to make sure I was actually helping and not just some weirdo feeding random children." Naomi supplied, her tone light but her eyes understanding. "It's okay. I get it. The world's a scary place, and trusting strangers with your kid is basically nightmare fuel." If only she knew how accurate that assessment was. Something like that. Victor managed what he hoped passed for a normal smile rather than the grimace of a man actively having a crisis. "Thank you for..." He gestured vaguely at Alexei, at the cafe, at everything he couldn't articulate. For seeing him, something shifted in Naomi's expression, a softness that made Victor's chest constrict painfully. He's pretty easy to see once you're actually looking. The observation felt like an indictment of everyone who'd walked past his son for 3 weeks, but also somehow like forgiveness for Victor's own failures. Would you like to sit? Naomi gestured toward Alexei's usual corner table. I can bring over the good hot chocolate. The recipe I definitely don't make because it violates about 6 health code suggestions about portion control. We don't want to interrupt your work. You're not interrupting anything except my ongoing battle with the espresso machine, which is a fight I'm losing anyway. She was already moving toward the counter, calling back over her shoulder. 3 chocolate croissants and 2 hot chocolates coming up. Unless you're more of a coffee person, we have coffee. She paused, considering. It's definitely a beverage. Despite everything, the anxiety, the fear, the bone-deep terror of what he was risking, Victor laughed. Actually laughed, the sound foreign to his own ears. Hot chocolate is fine. Excellent choice. The coffee here is basically punishment for past life sins anyway. Victor guided Alexei to the corner table, the boy moving with more energy than usual, clearly excited to be back in his safe space. As they sat, Alexei immediately reached for the napkin dispenser, pulling one out and pushing it toward Victor with an expectant look. What's this, Sin? Alexei pointed at the napkin, then made a drawing motion with his finger. You want me to draw something? A nod. Emphatic. Victor stared at the blank napkin, his mind completely empty of artistic inspiration. He'd carved wooden toys once, a lifetime ago when his hands were used for creation instead of destruction. But drawing? On demand? While being observed by a child who actually wanted something from him. Pressure had never felt so paralyzing. He picked up the pen Alexei had somehow produced from his pocket when had his son started carrying pens, and drew the only thing that came to mind, a crude bear. Not the elegant wooden toy he'd once carved, but a childish sketch that looked more like a lumpy potato with ears. Alexei studied it seriously, then smiled. Actually smiled, full and genuine, before carefully folding the napkin and tucking it into his pocket next to the crowned cat Naomi had drawn. Victor's drawing was going to live in his son's pocket next to Naomi's. He didn't know whether to be honored or devastated that such a small thing meant so much. When Naomi returned with their order, she glanced at the empty napkin dispenser and Alexei's pocket, her expression knowing. He's starting a collection, isn't he? Apparently. Good taste. Napkin art is an underappreciated medium. She set down their drinks and croissants with a flourish. There you go, gentlemen. Enjoy, and if anyone asks, those portions are totally regulation compliant. She started to leave, to return to her other duties, but Victor heard himself say, Wait. Naomi turned back, eyebrows raised questioningly. Victor had no idea what he was doing. No plan. No strategy. Just a desperate need to not let this moment end because for the first time in 5 months, his son was sitting across from him looking happy. Would you? He cleared his throat. Would you like to join us? If you have a break, or if it's not. I don't want to presume. Smooth, Morozov. Truly the smooth criminal. But Naomi just smiled that warm, genuine smile that was quickly becoming both his favorite and most feared thing. I'd love to. And just like that, everything changed. Thank you for watching this story until the end. If this one grabbed your attention, the next story will draw you in even deeper. It's packed with even more suspense and emotion.